Hello and welcome to Cafecito y Calidad, where we work hard to bring you high quality content while sipping delicious coffee. I'm your host, Elizabeth Sanchez, licensed marriage and family therapist. For today's episode, we're going to be talking about a really special topic in the field of mental health, couples therapy. Our special guest today is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a dear friend of mine and colleague. She specializes in couples therapy around issues around commitment, infidelity, and building intimacy in relationships. She's also has many years in specializing in the field of mental health. She owns her own private practice in Norwalk, California, and she is a wealth of knowledge. We're so lucky to have her today. So without further ado, let me introduce you, my dear friend, Janet Ambriz, licensed marriage and family therapist.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you,
Janet.
Liz. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you were able to agree to joining us in this episode. Would you be able to let our audience know today a little bit who you are, what got you into specializing in couples, and just a little bit about your practice?
Yeah, so it's funny actually because I didn't think I was going to be doing couples therapy when I initially, pursued my master's degree in MFT. So I really thought I was going to work with adolescents, with at-risk youth, and just in the process of going through the program and learning about couples and how dynamics play out in relationships, I just thought it was really interesting. And I just never really shied away from it. I had the opportunity to work with couples in the internships that I was in. So when you go through grad school, as you know, a lot of the internships are usually like more community based, where you're working a lot with minors and youth. And so I was lucky that I was at a site where I got the opportunity to work with couples, and I just kind of jumped right in, and I've just kept it going throughout my pre-license experience and then licensed experience. So I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that you're actually one of the therapists I typically refer to because, as you know, I steer away from working with couples. Too much going on in one room.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah. So I'd like to share a little bit about our background just so our audience knows who you are and why, I decided to invite you to our podcast. So we met back in 2016. We were working at a group practice, and I always just noticed that you were so passionate about working with couples. So instantly, I've always consulted with you. I've always, tried to pick your brain because it's, once again, I steer away from couples. And ever since, we both worked at the group practice, then we went our separate ways, but we've always kept in touch. You opened your own practice in Norwalk, and whether it's, business, clients, family related, you've always just been there. So I'm just really happy that our audience gets to get to know you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I remember we worked on a case together back at the group practice where you were seeing one of the partners and then I was seeing the couple. So that was nice. And it's been nice to continue to collaborate and consult and pick each other's brains.
Yeah. So, Janet, before we even go into the nitty gritty of couples therapy, why couples? What got you into this specialty?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I just never really shied away from it. And I think my perspective on couples prior to going to school, the examples I had were not positive, and the perspective was more, oh, well, you don't get along. Maybe separation is a good idea. And so I really did not think I was going to be working with couples. And then once I got into the field and just seeing like this is salvageable and we can incorporate new ways of communicating and breaking down patterns and doing things in a more positive way that can really build connection and intimacy. And it just fosters a different type of just growth and depth in relationships when you have the opportunity to do it with your partner. So it's really nice, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, since you have, you do have many years of experience in working with couples, what are some of the approaches that you do take
Hmm.
when you do have a couple in your office, which we're actually in today? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What are some of the approaches that you take?
Um, so I really like to start kind of from an individual perspective. I like to see what each partner, how they're perceiving their struggles, what their perspective is on what's going on. And so from the beginning, I'm just kind of like modeling understanding, compassion. I'm really curious about what their issues are. And so, if the focus of one partner is explaining, then the other partner gets to hear that, and they get to hear me interact with that partner and really provide validation or acknowledgement. So from the beginning, we're modeling, right? This is how we want to communicate. This is where we want to come from, and then we're just really introducing a new foundation for how to
Hmm.
communicate, and which sometimes means breaking down the way they were communicating.
Yeah.
Sometimes that could be really foreign to couples. We don't speak in that way. We don't talk like that. That's not what we're used to. So it's a lot of practicing how to communicate. How do I share with my partner what I want to say in a way that they can receive it best? So I really try to approach couples from them focusing on themselves. They need to focus on themselves, how they present in the relationship, how the way that they're contributing to the patterns that are going on, because it's so easy for couples to come in and want to pinpoint like, oh, this is
Hmm.
what my partner's doing, that's wrong, and they got a list, of what their partner is doing. So
Yeah.
I think from the beginning, we're really trying to
Yeah.
put the focus back on ourselves and how we're showing up, and everything else will just kind of play out. So I'm redirecting that constantly. So we're teaching positive communication skills, using those I statements, which again can be super foreign because we don't say things
Yeah.
in that way. Um, and just, building a new way to
Yeah.
communicate.
So, Janet, you mentioned couples come in with that list
Hmm.
of like, they're doing this wrong. Can you share some of like the top, maybe three things that couples are coming in with that are they're pinpointing that their partner's doing wrong?
Hmm. Well, a lot of times it's like, well, my partner doesn't listen, so they have this perception that the partner is being either dismissive or is not listening. A lot of times it's like they're not helpful, especially when there's kids involved. Like we get the default parent, so a lot of times they're having issues around that. Um, so it is trying to, again, coming back to how can I share this with my partner where they can actually hear what I'm saying? Because a lot of the dismissiveness or the that's a defense mechanism, right? And you withdraw if you're hearing if what your partner is saying and you're perceiving it as like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, or they're not happy with me, I'm not good
Mm-hmm.
enough,
Yeah.
they're going to shut down. And so then they're not engaged in conversation. And then the partner who's trying to express is just getting angrier and angrier,
Yeah.
right? So it really is slowing down, really slowing down communication. I'm interrupting my couples, pretty often where I'm like, okay, did you hear that? Kind of reflecting back to each
Yeah.
one of like, what did you hear? How are you feeling in your body? Because if we're shutting down and we're in flight or fight mode,
Yeah.
we're not listening anymore. So it's really teaching couples how to be mindful, be present, how to reduce that defensiveness to be
Mm-hmm.
able to hear what's going on.
And Janet, just hearing you talk, it seems like you have a lot of different skills that you bring into your couple session. Um, Can you maybe share with our audience, just because, I work with individuals, and when I bring up the idea of top of couples, client like my individual clients, they kind of thrown off by it because I think they don't really know what to expect
Hmm.
from a session. They don't know what they're going to be addressing. Would that be something you can share with our audience? Like, what does an initial couple session look like with you?
Hmm. Yeah, so I really, again, just want to start hearing what each partner, their perspective of what their struggles are, kind of what they're seeing, what they're feeling in their relationship. First session, I do want to get to know like their story, their love story,
Hmm.
what attracted them to each other, some of the good times that they've had. So I'm just really trying to get to know them, see how their dynamics are playing out. The beginning, I do let them kind of argue a little bit more just because I want to see like what's going on, how is this
Yeah.
playing out. Um, but that I think there is that idea like I'm going to be able to go somewhere and tell them everything about my partner and what they're doing and what they're
Yeah.
doing, and because of course we think that we're right. But so that is I start to kind of flip that and change the perspective on that with the focus on yourself and how you're showing up. So that is one thing that I wish or I hope people get from this is like understanding that like okay, it is also we're both playing a part into our relationship, and it's not about who's right and who's wrong, but just how it's playing out in the relationship. Well, what can we do to improve that on both ends, not just one?
And Janet, would you agree? Lots of couples come in thinking, right, where couples therapy is going to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, I'm not going to say often, but there are times in which that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so couples come in crisis mode most of the time. Unfortunately, it's not really a preventative thing. It's usually last resort. Let's see if this can be salvageable. So a lot of times, there's just a lot of resentment and a lot of experiences and history of things that haven't gone well. So it is hard to see, and so from the beginning we kind of lay that out too of like if you're coming to couples therapy, we're saying that you're going to do 110% for the relationship and focusing on your contributions and how our what's happening and why we are in this cycle or in these patterns. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. So you come in, what I heard you say is you come in and you really encourage them to really invest 110% before maybe making that decision of
Yeah.
deciding to part ways.
Yeah. I think one of the more challenging, it's most challenging when one partner is really invested and is willing and doing the homework and incorporating new techniques, and the other person is checked out, or there's just so much resentment and hurt that they're not willing to cooperate, or and rightfully so depending on what's going on. But back to if we're in couples therapy, it's because we're saying we're really gonna try and do our part for the relationship. And sometimes one partner is waiting for the other partner, like, well, if they do this first, then I'll do this. And, so it's kind of managing those expectations.
Yeah. And so going back to some of the issues that you do address with couples, Janet, I think a hot topic, I think in mental health and in our community is infidelity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important because I hear it a lot in my individual clients.
Mm-hmm.
Their struggles around I'm struggling to forgive my partner. My partner is on the fence of doing couples, but I'm struggling. And I think that's the number one issue that comes into for individual, like infidelity. So say you get a couple and they're finally willing to work on this issue around infidelity. What are some of the strategies that you take with that client or that couple?
Yeah, I think, the offended partner is really going to take the lead
Okay.
in therapy, because they're the hurt partner. They have, a lot to work through, but it's really important for the offending partner to be able to validate and acknowledge and be accountable for what has happened. And so we really want to build transparency from that's like the first step is like honesty, clarifying what happened, acknowledging it, and having like a plan for transparency. What does that partner need to be able to start to rebuild that trust? And I do tell couples, because if you're the offending party, there's sometimes like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm always answering, or they want to know, they're checking up on me, they want to know everything. And it's temporary. This is like the rebuilding process. We want transparency during this time, but of course we don't want to always feel like I don't have any privacy, or I can't do certain things, or so I do try to acknowledge both partners, building transparency and then rebuilding trust. And that's kind of double-ended, because to build trust there has to be an opportunity to allow opportunities for that person to show you. So I focus on redirecting what we're focusing on. So if we're going to be focusing like on all the little things our partner does wrong versus trying to focus on like, okay, they did this, or they're taking these extra steps, or they're making me feel secure in this way. I really want to highlight the things that they are doing, because not only on top of the infidelity, but these may be totally new patterns, totally new ways of showing love and affection and building intimacy that maybe they didn't have before. So we really want to highlight that, because it's hard. It's going to be easy to miss when it's something that we haven't really had before. So it really is like highlighting that, being able to go over the hurt, acknowledging that. If that partner has questions, I really like to kind of explore what the benefit of those answers might be, because we don't want to give out like graphic details of what happened. But so it's like, okay, what is the goal of knowing this information? But you do want to have an idea of like what happened, when did it start, and
Yeah.
and then the other part is for the offending partner to understand where that came from for them. That's where we're gonna have some accountability and some healing happen. Because if we're just, that partner is like, well, they're sorry, they're avoiding, they feel embarrassed or ashamed or guilty, it's not gonna help them really explore like what was happening for them. And so cheating is a symptom of what's going on in the relationship, not necessarily, not meaning that anybody did anything wrong, but it's really like, okay, where did this come from? What was missing for me? What what did I get out of this? To really understand those parts, to be able to see like, how do I get that out of my relationship, or how do I build that up in myself?
And I'm glad that you're speaking on that, because oftentimes I'm working with, like I mentioned, the individual client, and they start couples with you, and they bring in an entirely new set of problems into individual. Yeah, yeah. So one common one is the five love languages. Like couples not even really being able to address what their own love language is, or their partner's love language. And there's such a miscommunication, right? And resentment builds, boundaries continue to be crossed. So do you see that the five love languages comes up in your couples therapy as well?
Yeah, I think there's an expectation, that our partner should know what we like, or how to show us love and attention. And so I think I really love the five love languages, and I encourage my clients to like do the little quiz, and then they can
Yeah.
kind of figure it out. And they're all important. It's not just one, but there's one that's going to like speak to us a little bit more. And then once you do the quiz, then sometimes there's this expectation, well, like now that they know, they need to be
I
doing
get that a lot.
this. Why aren't they
Yeah.
doing it? And it's like, well, if we, think about it like a language. Like, are you going to learn it from one day to the other?
Yeah.
You're not. And so it is, again, highlighting the little things that it's like, oh, well, they did this differently. Did you notice that? So I do like to incorporate that. And we talk about giving our partner some leeway, and building that trust of like, well, do you feel like their intention is in the relationship and to love you and care for you? Because if we trust that that's their intention, we're going to be able to let them get away with a little bit more. Like if they're a little irritable, or if they say, a comment, we're going to be able to give them a little leeway if we trust like that they love us, or that they have our best intention.
But that takes time, right, Janet? Building that trust, being able to repair some of the injuries, right? When clients come to me, they're often like, well, I told them that my love language was acts of service, and they continue to struggle with it. And we have to like really step back, like you mentioned, and like, okay, well, are you highlighting the fact that maybe out of the 10 times he or she did it, and they struggle with even that part of it? So those are some of the things that you're working and addressing.
And then they're downplaying things like, oh, well, one time. They only did it one time. But it's like, well, we got to, how do we motivate behavior, right? And, I sometimes will flip it on them like, okay, if you're being the perfect partner that you think, you're showing up in the relationship being like, oh, I'm the best girlfriend ever. Like, I'm doing my best. But for your partner, they might say like, "Oh yeah, that's great, but I really enjoy this. I would really like to see this in our relationship." You wouldn't know unless your partner shares that with you. And you wouldn't you if it's not natural to you, it's going to take you a little bit to kind of get comfortable
Absolutely.
with it and start incorporating it. So I kind of try to flip it so that they can kind of get a different understanding of where their partner is coming from.
Hmm.
And it's twofold. Like now your partner knows your love language, but now you also know your partner's love language. So are how is that going for you? You know, are you able to kind of um, meet those needs for them?
Filling each other's love tank,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because oftentimes they're already depleted, right? There's nothing,
Mm-hmm.
so it takes time for them to build that.
Yeah. Yeah. It it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of redirecting and highlighting, and it's nice when they start to actually see like, oh yeah, we did do that differently, or
Hmm.
they did approach it in this different way, and it's nice when it starts to click for them.
Yeah. So I want to move on to another question, just because you and I both specialize in working with people of color.
Hmm.
So I want to see if you're able to speak around how that shows up in couples, like culture and diversity, and how you're able to address that
Hmm.
part in
Hmm.
couples therapy.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm seeing a lot more recently with couples and culture is like the dynamic with gender role, like,
Mm-hmm.
and expectations, and equality in the home, and when it comes to like home task, and especially when there's kids involved, because now you get the default parent. So I see that play out a lot. And I think for women, like, we have this idea of like what a traditional role is in the example that we've had culturally of what that should be and what it looks like, and even men, like what they expect
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
their partner to do. And as much as we think like we're evolved, or we've had different examples, or we know that okay, we should be more equal and in partnership, those cultural messages, they really tug at you.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of guilt around it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of unsaid expectations. So we're back to communication and really kind of exploring what that looks like, what you would want it to look like, and managing like your own guilt around it.
For our audience, those who don't know what the default parent is,
Hmm.
Janet, can you talk to our audience about or describe what that is?
Yeah, so default parent mean it is who the parenting usually falls to, so which is usually the woman, because when the baby's born, they're more attached to you. You're the one that's doing, like, if you're breastfeeding or doing the feeding and stuff like that, you're the one that gets time off of work to provide that care. Men don't get as much time off, so it just becomes easier. We think it becomes easier for the woman to do it, and then sometimes we just kind of take over and start doing these tasks. And so it is that balance of like whether we're going to allow our partner, express to our partner. And as a mom, you're just taking care of business, right? You're just doing
Mm-hmm.
things. And so we miss the part of like e- engaging our partner, and inviting them to join in and to participate. And it's I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing either. You're a default. Being the default might mean that you have more time, or your schedule allows you to be the default parent. But now it becomes, how am I being appreciated for that task?
Mm.
Can my partner, do they notice that? Do they appreciate it? Am I getting some time for myself and self care? Are they allowing for that? Is there opportunities for that? So you might be the default parent, but you can still ask for some time for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. And
And Janet, as we're talking about parenting and couples, so I think it might be important for, as we talk to our audience, to talk about even like changes. Because I know I've seen it maybe in my personal life and working with clients, but there's a shift of, when you have a couple and maybe honeymoon stage. They're, no children,
Mhm.
and then we get children.
Yeah.
you know, um,
Throws everything
it
off.
throws everything off, and it really changes the dynamic of the relationship. It changes intimacy, communication styles, self-care, um, and I it's challenging. So I'm sure that's something that you address with your
Hmm.
couples,
Yeah.
that shift.
Yeah. It brings up a whole another set of issues and struggles.
Yeah. What are some, would you be able to speak around some of the themes? Because at least from my perspective, what I've noticed is, gender roles, right?
Hmm.
Gender roles. Both parents are exhausted, so
Hmm.
we're not really also taking care of ourselves. How do we navigate, taking care of this new little one while trying to work, while trying to be a wife or husband, right?
Hmm.
So, what are some of maybe the tools that you use to help a couple continue that intimacy in their relationship while also parenting, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I think finding opportunities for yourself, that's first because you want to be centered and present to be able to join your partner, to be able to be a parent. And I think that's one of the things that's the hardest to do is the self care part because there's not a lot of time in the baby, especially little ones. They just need so much of your time and energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it is finding ways of um, doing small things for your own self care, engaging your partner to be able to participate. And even, dads, sometimes they stop doing activities and stuff because they
Mm-hmm.
feel really committed to being there for the baby. And then now we're irritable and we're annoyed with each other. So even them being able to go out and do something for themselves is important. And being able to encourage that in one another.
How about building self-care as a couple? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do talk a lot about like quality time together
Yeah.
and date nights. And, when we think date night, we think like a big event, right? Like going to dinner, going to a concert,
Yeah.
doing something big. But it doesn't have to be that way. It could be sitting together for a cup of coffee in the morning or just finding the time that's best for you to really like connect and having uninterrupted time together. It's really more about having a quality uninterrupted time versus how much time you spend together. Like hanging out and watching a movie is not really uninterrupted
Yeah.
quality time. So it is playing cards, going out in the backyard and, putting on a bonfire or something and being able to hang out with each other.
Being very intentional in what
Hmm.
you're doing
Yeah.
to just build that intimacy
Hmm.
that I think the last time I think it's 67% of I forgot the statistics, but I believe it's 67% of intimacy in couples goes down after
After having a baby.
after having a baby and children.
Yeah.
So it's it's a big issue,
Hmm.
right? And even and then we add other children or other
Hmm.
factors, right? So
You're competing for attention and sometimes even competing with each other, like who's more tired, who's doing more, so we come back to like not it's not a competition and being able to have compassion and understanding of hearing where our partner is coming from. It's not that taking it personal defense creeps up where it's like, oh, you hear them complain or talk about how hard their day is and you're like, instead
yeah.
of hearing what they're saying, you're like, oh, they're saying I'm not doing enough. And so now
Mm.
the other person is like shut down or starts to explain all the stuff that they're also doing, and now nobody feels heard. So it is trying to kind of slow down the communication and allow space for both of them to talk about their struggles, for both of them to talk about how difficult
Hmm.
it is managing life now that we have
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, now we have this little child, and if we're talking about people of color, right? We're trying to break those multi-generational cycles now so that we're also modeling to this little one or little ones, right? Like, how are we going to change things
Mm-hmm.
so that we break that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then we add all these different things into the mix.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then, when you're just a single couple with no kids, you're not thinking about parenting. You're not thinking
No.
about those multi-generational issues that are coming into play of like things like uh, one of the big ones is like greeting. You got to greet everybody, and not
Yeah.
giving your child that autonomy to be able to say no, or because it's like, what is it going to look like to the family? So things like that, and then depending on each parent's perspective might be different on those things,
Yeah.
and trying to advocate for your kid and share that kind of information
Yeah.
with your partner to see if they can get on board. So there's a lot going on.
Oh, yeah. That's why I always encourage people to do premarital
Mm-hmm.
because these are issues that you can start at least addressing them early on
Mm-hmm.
so that when the child or children come in, they're not, having to figure it all
Mm-hmm.
out while trying to figure out parenting, while trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure out work and,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be really nice if more couples came in for preventative um, therapy versus like crisis mode. Yeah.
Yeah, because what the top three issues that I get are that people come in for couples is financial, sex, and children,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if we're not addressing this before we're getting married, everything, children bring up everything, but
Yeah.
everything then starts to come up.
Mm-hmm.
Even religion, I've heard that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so Janet, and now that we've talked about couples and all the different, issues that they come in with, can you maybe on a lighter note speak around some of the success rates of couples? What are some of the statistics that you see?
And
Okay.
like, unfortunately, it's not great because we are coming in crisis mode.
Okay.
And so sometimes there is a lot of individual work to do. And I think that gets really highlighted in couples because like my approach is focus on what you're doing, how
Yeah.
you're contributing, how, your own awareness of what's going on for you, that it kind of flips the focus. I'm like, okay, well, what's triggering me?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a lot of individual work to do as well. So when couples come in crisis, it's not it,
So
it
the rates are not that high.
no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay. So you do bring it back a lot to having the client or the couple looking at themselves and
Mm-hmm.
some of the issues that they're personally dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done this before. We've collaborated.
Mm-hmm.
I work with the individual and you work with the couple. Once the client starts working on their individual, what are some of the things that you do see that the client's coming in like, wow, I should have held myself accountable for this? That maybe does make the relationship work?
Yeah, once if it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror. It's hard to recognize like, okay, I have things that I'm also bringing to the table that aren't so positive. But once either once we build awareness, there's no going back, right? So it is they do start to see a difference in the relationship. They start to think about how they're going to communicate, how they're going to express things. They start to think about where things are coming up for them, like their own insecurities,
Mm-hmm.
their own defense mechanisms. Um, and then that's going to show up a little bit different when you talk to your partner. You're going to recognize it if you're being triggered, and you're going to be able to kind of decipher, is this really my partner's issue? Is this really coming from me? Where is this coming from? And even just that question of being able to think like, okay, why am I feeling this way right now? And being able to be a little bit more reflective, and recognize that, hey, you may also be bringing your own stuff from your childhood and your past into the relationship. It's going to look a lot different.
So I like how you do address maybe even some of that multi-generational trauma, the what was modeled to
Mm-hmm.
them, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of relationship, gender roles, right? We
Mm-hmm.
talked about that. So you do
Gender
explore that.
roles, communication styles, um, dynamics of how, what example how they had in relationships, like what dynamics they've seen, and how that's influenced them, sometimes. And it unconsciously, we think we're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we never want to be like that, or how my parents, or whatever you saw. And then you see it kind of play out in the same ways in your
Yeah.
relationship. So it is, once you're aware, you can actually slow down and see like, okay, do I want to go down this path?
Yeah. I like those moments when couples are like, wow, I think I married my
Oh,
mom or
yeah.
my mom or my dad,
Mhm.
and they're able to. And I think that's sometimes of the aha moments that I at least I get to
Mhm.
see.
Mhm.
And so, do you see that often, Jen?
Yeah. And then it becomes it's tough because then now with that awareness, you're like, well, can I can this relationship get healthier? Because if I was
Wow.
drawn to it because of my past style and attachment styles, or and now you're growing and changing how you do things, like that's
Yeah.
going to impact the relationship.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of start to question, like, well, is my partner going to be able to meet me in this? Or are they going to want to stay in that? And now I can't, now I'm not going to
Hmm.
tolerate it because now I have awareness. Now I know a little bit better. So that creates a lot of shift.
Oh yeah. I'll get clients like, I think I'm outgrowing my partner.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since when they've been doing a lot of individual and couples work,
Mm-hmm.
I'm outgrowing them. I'm starting to realize I use the quote, we tend to choose the love that we think we deserve.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about an individual. Well, maybe this was the love you felt you deserved at that time before you started addressing your multi generational trauma, before you started addressing that hurt and that pain. And now you see things very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that now mean for you and your relationship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think in couples, I try to have them work through that like in a gentle way, because now it's not really their partner's fault either, right? Like now you're growing
Yeah.
and they're like, wait a minute, now you're changing and things are different for us. But it's like, how do we gently share that with our partner and set new boundaries and expectations, and giving our partner leeway that for them it might be a slower process because now we're a little off. So giving being but it doesn't mean it's not possible. It just means, like, are you willing to give them a little bit more patience? And now they're doing a lot more explaining and bringing in what they're learning from
Mm-hmm.
their own individual therapy
Yeah.
into the relationship. And if your partner is open to it, that's a positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I can see how, once again, right, we have a couple that were very unaware of what was happening. And then as they start doing the work, one of the things I hear a lot is, well, I'm staying because I've built this relationship with their family, right? Like they've become my family.
Mm-hmm.
They, I don't only have to say goodbye to he or she, I have to say goodbye to the tias, the cousins
Mm-hmm.
who've become my family
Yeah.
too. And that's lots of grief.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother loss, is separating from the family.
Yeah, and I'll hear couples say that's why I'm staying is I didn't grow up with a family
Mm-hmm.
or with this big family, and they've taken me in, and even if it's unhealthy and it's abusive, they'll stay.
Yeah.
So that's something that at least on my end I work on is
Mm-hmm.
building boundaries and building another maybe chosen family,
Yeah.
but it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It takes time to help them build a support system outside of the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, what I wanted the goal for this to be, is to really normalize, like, it's intense. Couples therapy is
Hmm.
intense, but it's so worth it.
Well, it
It's so
gets
worth
better,
it.
right? It gets
Mm-hmm.
worse before it gets better because
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is the first time you're actually addressing the
Yeah.
issues.
I tell couples, we're so, couples and individuals, we are s- creatures of habit. So we're so used to the things that we're familiar with. So even when you start to make positive changes, you are like, what's going on here? You're doubtful of it. It's hard to trust it. If your partner, is snappy and there's a lot of arguing going on, once they start approaching you differently and speaking in a positive way, you're weirded out. You're like, what the heck is going on? This is not my
Yeah.
partner. And unconsciously, you want the old reaction. And so we always
You're
want to go
comfortable
back
with it.
to the status quo. This is weird. This is different. I don't understand what's going on. And so you might pick at your partner a little bit more. If you're the one that's trying to do something different, they might pick at you a little bit more. So I do talk about that so that they're prepared for that. I do, especially when I feel like even an individual clients, we're doing couples work because they're bringing in what's
Totally.
going on in the relationship. And so as we're working on communication skills, I do tell them like, let's be prepared for not a good reaction, or maybe they might reject you, or they might
Mm-hmm.
dismiss what you're saying, and or even sometimes even like make fun of you, right? Like if you come in with the I statement of like, I feel really hurt that you didn't call me back, your partner might be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, dismiss it, and that takes you back a few
Yeah.
steps more,
Yeah.
right? So that's something that I do talk about with my couples and my individuals, because you got to be prepared for that. You got to be prepared for the
Yeah.
resistance and the kickback.
We laugh in session because we do a lot of like I statements or communication skills.
Hmm.
Like, who talks like this?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the other thing,
Yeah.
is like really normalizing that, because it sounds really cheesy. It sounds really foreign. It sounds robotic, the I feel when this.
Yeah.
So, but I have clients kind of make it their own, like
Oh, yeah.
just use your own language. I do bring in like feelings worksheets, because sometimes we don't have a big emotional vocabulary, and I am, even if you feel pissed, that could be your I statement. I'm pissed,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
this happened, but it really is about owning your own feelings, because it sounds really different if I tell you, you're so mean, you didn't do the
Mm-hmm.
dishes. um, then you're going to protect yourself, right? Like, what do you mean? I do
Totally.
this, I do that. How could you say I mean? But if you say, like, I'm really disappointed, or I'm really like upset because the dishes didn't get done, and I'm frustrated and overwhelmed. Now your partner will be like, oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
don't want you to feel frustrated and
Yeah.
overwhelmed. So it just opens up communication in a totally different way.
Yeah. Even nonverbal communication. So, because
Hmm.
although I don't do couples work, I do conjoint
Hmm.
sessions with clients, and my client comes in and they're like, "Well, they're not doing this, and I'm implementing everything that you're, teaching me in session," and then I come in, and then the partner's like, "Well, did you tell her that?" Well, the way your tone of voice, the way your
Hmm.
body look, like you're very explosive. You're not saying it, but you're explosive. So we even have to step back and talk about nonverbal
Yeah.
communication
Yeah.
because that speaks volumes too.
Yeah. And in couples, I try to have them like redefine things, like things that pre-therapy questions, like why are you mad? Um, or they sound dismissive, right? Like, what are you mad about? But when we try to redefine that, so your partner's really curious. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they really want to understand, like, I'm having a hard time understanding why you're
Yeah.
upset, or I'm really
Mm-hmm.
confused. And really taking that literally versus, oh, they're just being dismissive, or they don't care that I'm
Mm-hmm.
upset. So
Mm-hmm.
we really work on like redefining things and them agreeing on things,
Mm-hmm.
even things like taking a break. Like if things are getting too heated,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about space and giving things time, and
Mm-hmm.
circling back to themes and topics, and really being able to set that boundary for a break. And so we have to come up on like, what is going to be our cue word? What are we going to agree on that's going to tell me, okay, it's too much for you right now, but you do want to talk about this, and we are
Mm-hmm.
going to circle back to it.
Yeah.
And trying to give a time frame, right? Like, okay, you know
Yes.
what? I need a break, or let's put this on the back burner. Let's talk about it on the weekend. Let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about it after dinner.
But yeah, I think, going back to, yeah, it does sound very cheesy because
Mm-hmm.
I'll have my clients like, she told me or he told me to do this. Like, I have to give them 5 minutes and then we come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, we're working on repairing,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes time. And sometimes when we don't do that time frame, it taps into our own abandonment
Mm-hmm.
issues. And by giving our partner a time frame helps with
Yeah.
healing that,
Yeah.
right?
That's why I do say you want to give a time frame. You don't just want to walk out in the middle of the argument without saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go recenter myself. I'm not. It's hard for me to hear or
Mm-hmm.
respond. And let's talk about it in 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes."
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of the things that I'm hearing you say, it really does come back to not only communication skills, Janet, but vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you're really addressing it nicely and gently in your couples therapy, especially working with the Latino community. I can't even imagine, you do really need to be gentle because, in a heterosexual relationship and, in a Latino, maybe traditional Latino couples, men aren't really taught vulnerability. So the fact that you're willing to, be very gentle and model that for clients,
Yeah, and trying to meet them where they're
where
at.
they're at as well, and honoring kind of what they also learned.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to couples.
Couples, yeah. So Janet, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. You really gave us a lot of, great tips around working with couples, what couples can expect if they do start couples therapy, some of the big issues such as communication, infidelity, parenting. So you really, gave us a lot of information. But how can our viewers find you?
Yeah, so I do have my Instagram page, so it's Therapy with Janet, and also my website, which is just my full name, janetambriz.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us today on Cafecito y Calidad. So definitely stay tuned. Make sure you write us a review or subscribe to our YouTube page. We are also on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on Instagram. So Calidad Holistic Wellness and Cafecito y Calidad. And my website, so Calidad Holistic Wellness and Therapy. Thank you so much.